So today we're going to keep talking about one-step equations. The only difference today we're talking about multiplication and division. So our goal is to solve one-step equations using multiplication and division. So here are the three steps we're going to follow today. You will notice they are the exact same steps as you wrote down yesterday. That's why I'm not making you write them down. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to write the equation. This is also when you would draw the line of equality. So find your equal sign and draw a line down through your workspace. Step 2, you're going to isolate the x term or the p term or the w term using inverse operations. Yesterday, the inverse operations we looked at were addition and subtraction. Today, we're looking at multiplication and division, but they're still inverse operations. Then you're going to simplify both sides of the equation. I already said whether or not to write it 3 times, so I'm not going to say it again. Any other questions that I haven't already addressed? Okay. Here is our first example for today, so go ahead and write this one down. Remember, as you're writing it, draw your line down from the equal sign. That's your line of equality. Anything you do to one side of that line, you have to do to the other side of that line as well. So what is happening with this 5 and the x? What is that? That's multiplication. A number right next to a variable is multiplication. What is the inverse of multiplying? Dividing. So I need to divide both sides by 5. Now, the reason this trick works, I'm going to concentrate on the right side first. What is 5 divided by 5? It's 1. 1x is the same thing as just x, right? So that's why this works to get the x by itself. It leaves you with a 1x, or just an x. Equals, what do we get on the left side? What is 15 divided by 5? 3. And then you can always plug the 3 back in right here and check your work. Now, as I was walking around checking the warm-ups, it seems like a lot of you are just sort of doing the problems backwards. You're thinking like, okay, 2 times 5, that's 10, so that's not it. 3 times, oh, it must be a 3, x equals 3. Don't do that. It's going to work for the next couple days. It will not work by the time we get to two-step equations. There's just too much to be doing in your head. So if you are trying to do the guess, check, revise method, like plug things in until you find something that works, do not do that. It is going to come back and bite you in the behind because you are not going to know how to solve equations once they get a little harder. So practice on the easy ones. Questions? All right, here is number 2. Again, you might just know off the top of your head what needs to be multiplied by 12 to give you 120, but show your work, go through the process so you can practice. Alright, so here's my line of equality. What is bothering the x? The 12. And what operation is that? What's happening? This is multiplication. And how do I undo multiplication? Dividing. And if I divide the left by 12, I need to also divide the right by 12. So 12 divided by 12, that gives me 1x, or just x, equals 120 divided by 12 is 10. So x equals 10. What are your questions? All right, here's number 3. Now, that looks like a fraction, but fractions are another way to write what? Division. This is just x divided by 4. How do you undo dividing something by 4? You multiply. So I'm going to put times 4 next to each side. 4 divided by, like dividing by 4 times 4, those just undo each other. So that would leave you with 1x, or just an x, equals, what is negative 9 times 4? Negative 36. Very good. And then again, you can check it by plugging it back in. If you did negative 36 divided by 4, you would get a negative 9. Remember, as you're writing, put your line of equality. What is bothering the x? The 4. And what is this operation? Division. And how do I undo division? Multiplication. So I'm just going to write a times 4 next to each side. So the 4's are gone, right? That leaves us just a 1x on the right side. What is 4 times 14, or 14 times 4? 56. Very good. Now notice how I just wrote the 4 times 14. If you did 14 times 4 or 4 times 14, those are the same thing. Multiplication is what we call commutative, so you could write it in either order. However, division is not, so be a little more careful on your order when we're doing division. Questions? Alright, here's another one. This one's kind of tricky. I will talk about how to do this one in just a second. Take a second to write it down. Alright, what's happening with your x? That's the first thing we need to talk about. The x is being what? Divided by, how do you undo dividing by 4? Multiply by 4. So I'm going to write times 4 on both sides of the equal sign. Those go away, right? I'm left with an x equals, I need to figure out what all this is. You will be happy to know that those of you who have calculators can just type that in. The way you type that in, you'd use the negative button. You type in 18. You hit the ABC button. You hit the 9. You hit the times button. You hit the 4 button. You type in an equal sign. It will do the whole thing for you. Do you have the answer? You don't have an ABC button. Right there. What is it? Anyone have it? Negative 8 is the answer. So, depending on which calculator you have, you're going to need to type it in a little bit differently. I'll come around and double check for you. Some of you that don't have the ABC button, you have a button that looks like this. You hit that first, and then you type in what you want on the top and what you want on the bottom. But again, just kind of double check this until you end up with a negative 8. If you cannot get this to equal negative 8, you need to raise your hand so I can come help you type it in. Alright, if you are choosing to do this by hand, you would need to reduce this one first and then do the multiplication. But I don't know why you would do it by hand when I'm providing calculators for those of you who forgot. Alright, so number 6, what's happening with the x? Wait, what's happening with the x? That's multiplication. How do we undo multiplying? Divide. Good. You were answering the right answer, but the wrong question. Okay. The 6's are gone, right? So I'm just left with an x on the right. What is negative 66 divided by 6? Negative 11. And then you can plug it back in to check if you want, but I'm telling you right now that is correct. All right, number 7. Now what's happening to the x? This is division. How do I undo division? Multiplication. So you need to write a times 2 on both sides. The 2's are going to go away. You're just left with 1x equals, what's 7 times 2? 14. Very good. And you can plug that one back in to check. Any questions? Like I said, those are sort of like the standard examples. I'm going to show you kind of the more tricky examples now. Any questions? All right, we're going to start with a vocabulary term. The vocabulary term is reciprocal. Now, I'm going to show you, don't write this one down. Write the word reciprocal, but don't write this down. This is the standard book definition. A reciprocal is a number related to another. Dramatic pause for the bell. A number related to another in such a way that when multiplied together, their product is 1. That sounds crazy, right? How did I go from one of those fractions to the other one? What did I do? In normal terms, I flipped it. That is the definition of reciprocal. You flip a fraction. So write down the definition that makes sense to you. If this definition makes sense to you, feel free to write it down. If flip the fraction makes more sense to you, write that down, okay? So we are going to use a trick with reciprocals to solve equations. Notice it says the product is 1. When you are solving using multiplication and division, your goal is to get a 1x, right? So this is a trick to help us get a 1x. We're just going to take the reciprocal of a fraction. Any questions so far? Okay, write these two down. Get your calculators in hand, ready to go. And then I'm going to show you how we use reciprocals. These are tricky. There are 3 of these on your homework. I believe. Maybe more. I counted 3. At least 3. Okay. We need to get rid of the 2 over 5, right? Now, it's multiplication, right? Normally we undo multiplication by dividing, but when you divide fractions, you flip it and then multiply. Do you guys remember that trick? So we're actually going to see, it's just like skip the writing the division part. We're just going to think of the reciprocal. What is the reciprocal of 2 over 5? 5 over 2. You are multiplying both sides by the reciprocal. The reason this works so well is, do you see how the 5s would cancel and the 2s would cancel? Anytime you have a fraction with the same number on top and the same number on bottom, they equal a 1. So the 5s equal a 1 and the 2s equal a 1. So that leaves us with a 1x. But remember, 1x is the same thing as just x. I rewrote it. I know. I'm sorry.
So when we flip it, we cross multiply?
No, I was just showing you that the 5s cancel and the 2s cancel. You're going to flip the fraction and multiply both sides by that fraction. So what you need to type in your calculator is this part right here. Depending on what calculator you have, you might have to type it in a little differently. The standard calculators, the ones that I lend you, you would type in the 6, then the multiplication symbol, then the 5, then the ABC button, the magical ABC button, then the 2, and then an equal sign. Does anyone have an answer for me? 15. So rework this problem, type it in a bunch of different ways until you find the way that equals 15, and then that's the right way in the future. Can anyone not figure out for the life of them what way to type it in their calculator or how to type it in the calculator? Are we good? Okay, what's the reciprocal of 4 over 5? So I'm going to multiply both sides by 5 over 4. Remember, that works because 5 over 5 would give us a 1. 4 over 4 would give us a 1. What a neat trick. So this leaves us with a 1x equals, all I need to know is what 25 times 5/4 is. Did I say 25? I meant 28. 28 times sign 5, the ABC button, 4. What did you guys say it was? 35. If you cannot get 35, you need to raise your hand so I can help you type it into the calculator. There are at least 3 like this on your homework tonight. So you need to know what you're doing and how to type it in. What are your questions? All right, before your homework, I want to ask you a couple questions. I keep saying, like, solve equations. We're solving equations. Today we're going to solve equations. And all your directions say solve equations. What is that word? What does that mean, that phrase, solve an equation? What does that mean? What does it mean to solve an equation? You're going to use multiplication and division, but that's not what it means to solve. What does it mean to solve? Solve the problem. Solve means to solve, is what you guys keep telling me. Show your work, that's part of it. Give me an answer that doesn't use the word solve. The definition of solve can't have the word solve in it. What's the whole point? We're going to answer it. What does our answer always look like? X equals. Very good. That's what it means to solve. You are finding what X equals. So when the directions say solve an equation, you are telling me what X equals, or Y equals, or P equals. Good. You're isolating the variable. Next, how do I undo multiplying by a fraction? I have to find the reciprocal. You multiply both sides by the reciprocal. Good. How do you know if an answer is right? You can plug it back in and check your work. Any questions before I give you your homework?